Today, the ocean stops being scenery and starts answering back. A breath draws a line across the water. A door that refuses to open learns to host. A staged mayday tries to sell panic, and a real wave interrupts the script. We rescue without opening. We measure stillness, not spectacle. Hunter, razor, broker, filed under weather. If you can feel the 0.7 hum in your chest, you already know the verb. With, not on. Borrow, carry, return. This is The Surface Will Learn Us. Hold your breath and don't push the door. The noon light over Port Marin didn't shout. It exhaled. A measured brightness lay across the harbor like a tablecloth the sea had ironed itself. Ropes creaked with the polite complaint of old backs. Gulls typed out small commas into the sky. Diesel ghosts from the morning run slipped into the low rafters of the pier. On the ledge, the rib's steel arc kept its vigil with the kind of patience that makes clocks jealous. Ethan stood beneath it with one palm on the hatch seam, not pressing, simply letting the metal remember his temperature. Ghost leaned the warm weight of a shoulder against his shin, tail held at that low, even angle that means you may listen longer than you speak. No one here is asking for proof you don't owe. Barometer is friendly, Mara said in his ear, voice smooth as sanded oak. Noise floor cooperative, corridor filaments at 2 and 7 o'clock holding shape. Hunter pretending to be a contour line, razor's whistle is sheathed, blue listener present, ellipse posture, minimum wake. If you were the sort to teach, the room is the sort to learn. No doors, Ethan said, maddeningly soft with certainty. Just sentences. He thumbed the panel latch. The blue ring inside the seam bowed once, held, bowed again, and returned to that patient, memory-warm thrum, like a house acknowledging a knock without unlatching anything at all. Ethan didn't descend. He poured a cup of coffee, watched steam take the air the way ink takes paper, and went still in the way that invites other things to relax. The ledge breathed in the rhythm of a creature that has finally finished auditioning for the world and found work. Downshore, the harbor flared itself into the sort of busy that keeps people fed without forgetting to rinse their hands. Finch's gray dinghy, paint rubbed smooth by honest knuckles, drifted toward the lane and then stopped. Motor off. Palms turned up in a posture that read like a prayer written by someone who got over themselves. Window 80 minutes, Mara murmured, tapping effortless lines of invisible arithmetic. Tide wind voices all well behaved. The ocean is rubbing the sleep from its eyes and would like a quiet conversation. Ethan shifted his stance a half-inch west and let return happen. Not an order, not a trick, a permission. He unlatched his jaw, let the sternum ride a half beat behind the rib, set the ankles the way an old carpenter sets a ladder, firm, but with the humility to check the ground twice. The surface stitched a pencil crease from hatch to a polite distance beyond Finch's bow. Not a road, a welcome. Ghost's ears flicked once and settled, his breath flattening into the small, steady vowel he saved for weather he approved of. Dr. Lila Chen hovered out there, in a no-way skiff with the kind of equipment that looks like it belongs in a lab but has learned to live with its shoes off. She lifted an air-coupled mic, not dipping it, not daring the surface to prove itself, just holding it near, like a good question. The mic didn't show miracles, it showed a slope, the kind of data that stares down its own drama. Chen's cheeks, though, she was too honest to hide the heat that flushes when a thing you've respected returns the courtesy. It writes neat, she said, barely louder than the click of a gull's foot crossing a cleat, if we don't smudge it. Mason K. The man who could aim a lens the way a surgeon aims a scalpel or a villain aims a sales pitch stayed farther back than habit. He'd taught his shadow to quit shouting. His camera, for once, looked like a notebook. When he glanced at Ethan, it wasn't permission he asked for. It was grammar. Ethan turned just enough to let his voice carry across plain water without grabbing it. If you can't see it, mirror it, he said in the 15 seconds. Then we erase. That's the witness fee. The phrase fell into the harbor with no splash at all, absorbed the way a dock accepts the next footprint without taking a vote. Far offshore, Razor adjusted its trim by a degree that felt like the difference between an apology and a suggestion. A bright, polite chirp skated the courtesy band, underlining the very edge it had hoped to erase. Mara smiled in the wire. Hallway facts, host remains off stage. Good, Ethan said. Stories keep better that way. He lifted his free hand off the seam. The crease held on a heartbeat, as if reluctant to abandon good manners, and then softened back into the blank sentence, ordinary water prefers to be. Finch inverted the enamel mug on his bow, no objects, and nodded like a man putting a hat back on its hook after remembering the house rules. Ghost nosed Ethan's wrist once, a small receipt for a small transaction paid exactly. The rest of the hour unfolded by the old logic that makes an afternoon sit properly in its chair. Chen wrote stillness into method, annotating how not to make a fuss. Mason filmed a sequence in which nothing performed, and therefore everything was allowed to be true. Blue Listener kept its ellipse. Its captain, whoever they were, had learned to aim politeness with the same care one usually reserves for weapons. The sea obliged them all by being itself and with occasional generosity letting humans attend. Ethan cracked the panel once more, giving the ring time for a second bow. He did not descend. He breathed the grammar he'd learned like lullabies, 4, 4, 1, hold 2, and felt the chamber's answering warmth in the tiny pocket behind his sternum. He exhaled across the shaping port that wasn't a port so much as a softness. The chamber took the contour, carried it under the seam, and returned it cooler, like a stamped passport whose clerk had seen everything and judged nothing. Blue Listener adjusted, Mara said. Small filament copies, tender breath in phase. Corridor behaves as if it grew here and we only just noticed. Then let it grow, Ethan answered, and left his hand where it could be recognized rather than used. Hunter trimmed in just enough to make a point it didn't need. Its wake puffed the edge of the corridor like a bully bumping shoulders in a hallway. Ethan didn't flinch. He paid in less. Finch mirrored. The corridor narrowed of its own accord, a dignified spine choosing better posture. The wake canceled itself. Rude geometry ran out of boasting angles. Ghost sighed. The soft, unlettered commentary of a creature who votes for quiet and wins sometimes. Report, Mara said after the witness fee had been paid and erased twice just to prove that politeness scales. Surface asked in full sentences, Ethan said. We answered with verbs, not nouns. He put the coffee cap back over empty and set it near the hatch without letting it become an object. The ring dimmed again to memory. The sea kept its dictionary. People went on being fed by smaller truths. He didn't look up when the first clickbait van departed the pier. He did watch the little boy in the red hoodie stand in front of the rule board Finch had nailed up last week, just 3 lines, nothing with teeth, and read them carefully, his lips shaping with not on as if the words were new instruments he'd found and wanted to keep without stealing. The boy placed his small palm on the rail and stood still 3 seconds, as if honoring a moment of silence someone had forgotten to call for. Then he bounced away, cure for stillness complete, and the morning exhaled again. Ethan touched the seam once more, not to own it, just to promise that if it needed him to show up, he knew the address. The promise was reciprocal and therefore usable. Ghost's tail tapped exactly once against his boot. Downshore, a bellbuoy spoke in one syllable and gave the rest of the sentence to the tide. If this was what peace looked like, small, unmarketable, the kind that doesn't photograph well, then the world had accidentally handed them a reasonable afternoon, which is rarer than victory and just as expensive. The sun moved a degree. Mara's numbers yawned like cats do when they neither approve nor object. Razor kept its whistle holstered. Hunter decided to look like landscape again. Blue listener, ellipse intact, drifted a polite yard farther out. To prove it could, then drifted back in to prove it wanted to. Ethan said it aloud this time just to tug the words into a room that could prove they'd been spoken. Ask, not take. The rib answered in sub-audible steel. The harbor understood in its body. The chapter closed without a staple. The afternoon wore its light like good manners. Wind, trimmed, swell, honest. The ledge breathed with the patient clockwork of a creature that has stopped auditioning. Ethan stood by the central rib with Ghost pressed into his shin, the dog's tail at that low, even angle that means we can afford to listen longer than we speak. Window. 80 minutes, Mara said, noise floor friendly. Offshore, blue listener present, second filament steady, Hunter pretending to be a map feature. Good day to practice guest right, Ethan said. We host. We do not own. He opened the panel. The blue ring bowed one, hold, one, and returned to memory warmth. Not yet descending. He poured a cap of coffee, let steam climb, and watched the air find its lanes without orders. He stepped to the west edge and exhaled return, that narrow, forgiving curve the chamber liked to carry. The corridor suggested itself between shelf and horizon. Not a road, a welcome. A gray dinghy appeared where the lane becomes obvious to people who know how to see it. Motor off. Operator seated low, hands visible on the thwart. Posture first. The operator raised a palm. Ethan mirrored it. Ghost's ears moved once and settled. Tender asks to share air, Mara said. No radio, no nouns. Ethan nodded into the weather. Let them come to the sentence and not change the verb. The dinghy drifted in by geometry rather than throttle, stopping at the edge where help stays help. Between them 20 yards of soft water carried steam. Ethan lifted the thermos cap. The operator cupped their hands. Both exhaled over the space where a bridge would be if bridges were the kind of thing you could assemble out of posture. Steam crossed. Not dramatic. Accurate. The operator inhaled, closed their eyes, and smiled the way professionals do when tools work as designed. They set a sealed pouch on the bow, clear, vacuumed, empty but not nothing, with a line of dots embossed across the plastic like braille for weather. They didn't lift it. They breathed over it once. Packet contains air plus pattern, Mara whispered, delighted. No paper. A training shape for breath, generous. Ethan exhaled the exact shape he'd used to form the lane. The operator mirrored, then shortened, then softened. The lane thickened a hair and became easier to maintain together. Guessed right, Ethan said. You brought a gift you're not asking me to keep. The operator nodded. We came to learn your house rules and leave only less behind. He opened the panel and descended to the rotunda without lamp. The pedestal warmed to his fingers. The seam, the east-west smile that wasn't a door, cooled to a wear. He breathed the grammar Teresa Forks 4-1, hold, 2. Then the small 3 Mara had named threshold. Above, the tender remained at the lane's lip. The room, the lane, and the boat became one thought: do not push, invite. The shaping port appeared as a softness in the air, not a slit. Ethan exhaled across it and cut his exhale sooner than habit. The chamber took the shape, carried it under the seam, and returned it cooler. A stamped passport from stone. Blue listener has adjusted to your ask, Mara murmured. Small filament copies. Tender breath is in phase. The house accepts guests. Ghost made a low, satisfied O at the hatch. You can hear a dog nod if you've lived a certain kind of life. Impatience is loud even when it whispers. The hunter trimmed in, not far, just enough to crumple the seam's outer margin. No ping, presence is tactic. The water scuffed. Numbers that would have stayed shy began to gossip. Hunter violating corridor etiquette, Mara said. Recommendation: add less together. Copy, Ethan said. He shaped return slimmer than usual on the lane. The operator matched the reduction without looking coached. Blue listener set its smallest side toward the hunter and did the exact demonstration of less that adults do for children without announcing the lesson. The second filament tucked behind the tender's quiet so thoroughly it became the tender's quiet. The corridor narrowed itself without sulking. The hunter's wake canceled its own leverage. Rude geometry found fewer angles to brag about. A pressure, not sound, arrived at the seam like a chair quietly pulled from a table. The rotunda did not open. It hosted. Ethan stood inside the threshold without stepping. The seam cooled, then warmed, then cooled again. The natural pocket below tipped a degree, a hand adjusting a page for better light. Above, the operator bowed. 1, hold, 1. Ethan answered 1, hold 1. Ghost placed a paw on the panel seam and left it there, a dog's signature. This is what guest right feels like, Mara said. The room kept its vow. It offered presence, not passage. Then we'll take presence, Ethan said, and leave passage unfussed. The hunter tried to look busy without admitting it was lonely. A microscopic trim slide into a colder vein produced the tiny harmonic squeal the courtesy band had learned to hear. The squeal ricocheted off nothing, caught by no gear, owned by nobody, yet it stitched a dotted line where the corridor's edge asked to be. They just underlined the lane they wanted to erase, Mara observed, amused. We accept the gift and forget who sent it. Ethan reduced breath a fraction more. The operator mirrored. The lane sharpened like a pencil that didn't know it could still write. They let the moment end itself. Ethan held hold the way you hold a door for a stranger who doesn't owe you thanks. He exhaled too. Return with less than before, and the chamber gave a tiny warm behind him that wasn't for him alone. It was the house saying good visit. The operator touched 2 fingers to their brow and backed the dinghy out of the corridor by not moving at all. Mara watched their wake. It folded into nothing at the seam like a letter that chooses to self-destruct before anyone has to raise their voice. The blue listener rotated back to its polite ellipse. The second filament returned to student posture. The hunter drifted 3 cables out to where hubris goes to tidy its notes. Ethan rose to the hatch. Ghost leaned into him like punctuation that refuses italics. He sealed the panel and sat with his back against the rib, breathing the station's steady vowel. Report? Mara asked. Guessed right, Ethan said. We formed a lane by courtesy and shared air without trading objects. The tender brought a manual with no words and left it without asking us to keep anything. We stood inside the threshold. The room hosted didn't open. The hunter broke etiquette. Les corrected it. Everyone left fewer footprints than they arrived with. And what did you take? Mara said. How? Ethan answered. A way to let someone in without giving anything away that isn't already theirs. Ghost tail tapped once, the rhythm of agreements that don't need signatures. Offshore, the corridor dissolved into ordinary water, which is where good examples go to rest. The afternoon finished putting its tools away and clicked the lamp off with a finger made of wind. The house stayed a house. The sea kept its library. The sky didn't blacken, it argued. Lines of wind stacked like bad clauses. Chop cross-hatched the sentence until the grammar itself winced. The air tasted like a coin. Copper and forecast. Mara's voice thinned to business. Pressure dropping to intent. Shear developing at 200 to 20 degree. Corridor still coherent. Hunter wide, razor under shade. Blue listener tightening ellipse. Recommend posture, not proof. Ethan set his feet the way dock workers set a pallet. Ready to move, refused to hurry. Ghost pressed his weight into Ethan's shin as if bracing two beings with one muscle. The rib hummed a softer 0.7, the sound of a house putting away glass before a party no one invited. A red flare toward daylight above the lane mouth, too clean, too centered, the pyrotechnic equivalent of a well-lit lie. A rubber tender spun there, performing helplessness. Two figures in bright jackets waved their arms in time with each other, as if fear had a rehearsal. The radio scraped itself hoarse. Mayday, engine gone. Taking water. Inside the corridor, inside the corridor. Mason's camera twitched on instinct, then steadied. He had taught it new manners. Chen's posture didn't budge. She lifted the air-coupled mic and held it the way archivists hold old pages, near, never on. Finch raised both palms, a punctuation mark you could read from shore. Ask before move. The storm chewed on that sentence and found it nutritionless. Engine warm, Mara said, the syllables neat as a ledger, hull dry. Fuel line primed, signal staged, razor in the shadow, Hunter at the lock screen, ready to monetize panic. A rescue for sale, Ethan said, quiet as a verdict. Decline the price, accept the person. He did not drop through the panel. He matched 0.7 and opened the seam's memory, not the door. Breath wrote with, not on. A pencil lane drew itself thin and honest, the kind of geometry that would rather be correct than famous. Blue listener presented the side that says, I'm here, not hungry. Finch paralleled the corridor with his motor sleeping. Silence made the better tool. The stunt hull nudged the lane, trying to live rent-free in physics. The lane stepped aside the way a patient host declines a spilled drink to save a shirt. The tender yawed, harmless and false, long enough to flash clean skegs that had not met today's rocks. Chen did not bother to speak her skepticism. Her eyes did it in standard units. Mason, for once, narrated to himself instead of the lens, staged. Then the storm, which had been pretending to read the room, lost interest in decorum. Wind stepped up, short and mean. A cross-slap popped the tender off balance. One of the actors, a man with the wrong kind of confidence, went overboard for real. His shout forgot the script. Found the old word in the spine. Help. Ethan leaned the half-beat clean. The seam cooled to aware, warmed to ready, cooled again to intention. Finch breathed with blue listener compacted to the smallest version of itself. The fold carried the man beside the seam, no opening, held him like a tray at the lane's lip, a physics that had chosen to be kind. Chen threw a line over, not in. Mason dropped the camera, which landed against the thwart with a noise that would embarrass lesser men, and pulled like a person who has remembered which noun matters first. The man came aboard coughing. For a moment his eyes held the whole childhood of someone who had never made a contract with gravity. He gripped the line as if it could apologize. He tried to talk. The wind denied him vowels. He nodded instead the oldest language there is. Razor tried to harvest. A bright signature rose, angling for a clip that could be turned into pitch. The whistle cracked, audible, embarrassing, the sound of a company shoe catching on a dock nail. Hunter trimmed angle, considered the price of appearing noble, and chose distance. Broker's wake paused as if waiting for applause that wisely never came, then slid back into the anonymity where failed sales go to nap. The rain made up its mind. It fell correctly, straight, untheatrical, a sheet the size of the harbor with room for everyone under it. The tender drifted back into competence, as if ashamed of the costume. Chen kept her mic over the water the way one holds a hat in a church. Finch brought the rescued man to the pier and put him on the right side of a railing. Redding met him with a towel and a look that combines civic mercy with the sort of memory that files long. Report, Mara said, the storm already being shelved as usable weather. Carried without opening, Ethan answered. Accepted person, declined price. Corridor remained a sentence, not a product. Host unrecorded. Ghost sneezed once, disapproval evaporating as salt. The ribs 0.7 lengthened, elastic again. The sound of a house rolling its shoulders after holding still. Ethan shut the panel, not like a closing, but like a period at the end of a paragraph that had finally learned not to run on. The red flare's smoke thin-threaded toward nothing. Mason picked up his camera and looked at the scuff it had earned, a scrape that might teach the lens humility better than 1,000 likes. He laughed once, incredulous and grateful. I got the part where nothing cheated, he said. Turns out that shot holds. Chen folded the method back into ink. Addendum for the paper, she said. In rescue conditions, nearness only persists. Measure absence, forbid intrusion. Rope over, not in. Lane formed by breath, not hardware. Evidentiary burden satisfied by repeating slope. No coordinates. Redding, who had seen enough of both stunts and sincerity to know which one needed law, took out his pen. We'll staple that, he said. The county likes manners that can quote. Blue listener widened its ellipse, 1 patient meter, and returned it, like a wave handing back a toy it borrowed for a moment to see how it fit. Farther. Out, Hunter became a duller line until it was indistinguishable from geography. Razor's whistle stayed in its throat. Broker found a different coastline. The market for miracles has always been spotty in a crosswind. The rescued man, now wrapped in a foil blanket loud enough to attract a heli from another county, stared at the water as if he owed it rent. I thought, he managed. Ethan shook his head. You thought you were the point, he said, not unkind. You were the person. The point was the rule. The man nodded, then sat very still. The most sincere apology possible from someone who has not yet learned how to say it. The sky defended a strip of pale lemon under the cloud line, that low mercy the Atlantic offers to anybody willing to stand at the right angle. Mara let her numbers nap. Ghost's tail tapped the deck, 1, 2, like a waiter folding the last napkin after closing. The corridor dissolved back into ordinary water. Good examples went to rest in their invisible drawer, ready for the next time someone tried to sell the same lie and found the harbor newly literate. The storm walked away, insulted and cleaner. The ledge breathed the last of its cautious breaths and returned to the long vowel of work. Ethan stood there long enough to prove he could leave, then left, because the lesson only counts if you stop teaching it before it becomes a brand. The rain rinsed the harbor until it tasted like itself again. It thinned to a correct curtain, neither spectacle nor sting, and hung there like a boundary everyone agreed to honor. Mason raised a quiet lens and looked at Ethan with a question shaped like two options. You say the trick, he offered, or say the rule. The rule, Ethan said, because the trick would breed. With, not on, borrow, carry, return, pay in less, and the house gives you place back. He bowed one hold, won by posture alone. Ghost put his paw on the seam like a notary whose signature is fur and honesty. Finch lifted a palm. Chen folded the mic. Sometimes measuring is a way of speaking too loudly. Offshore, Blue Listener drew a small ellipse that reads, in the grammar of boats, here, still, politely. Behind Ethan's sternum, the chamber warmed. Ahead of him, the seam cooled. Then both evened into something like consent. We publish nearness only, Chen said to the board she'd screwed into honest wood. Pressure slope, repeatable absence, no coordinates of the host. Rope over the water, instruments in the air. If you can't mirror it, decline. She pressed the page flat with the heel of her hand. Paper creased with the meekness of servants. The rule did not. They'll call that vague, Mason said, kindly fatalistic. They can call it harder, Chen replied. Vague is when. This is how. Out in the middle distance, Hunter angled for a farewell it hadn't earned. Broker drifted like an unsigned check. Razor kept its whistle in its pocket the way a reformed bully carries an apology no one believes yet. They've got hallway facts and a weather report, Mara said. They'll chew them like gum until the flavor goes. They can keep both, Ethan answered, and the wind filed his sentence under policy. A small skiff wandered near the seams neighborhood. Father-daughter, and a cooler full of guesses. The chop left over from the storm stood up by habit. Ethan matched 0.7 and asked the fold to remember kindly. The skiff lifted on a hand no one had scheduled and set down away from the seam with the dignity of an usher redirecting late arrivals. The father waved, the human reflex to being spared work. The girl waved bigger because children are allowed to amplify gratitude without irony. Finch saluted with 2 fingers. Chen's mouth made the shape of a smile that wouldn't dare be caught making sound. Across Ethan's chest, the private glyph wrote itself once 441 hold 235 and removed itself. The proof remained with the person who needed to carry it, which is the only kind of proof the sea respects. He felt the warmth behind his sternum settle back toward the rib like a candle deciding not to be a fire. Ghost tapped his tail on the deck twice, approval and punctuation. They left no coordinates. They left a rule. Chen taped a second page beneath the first. Supplemental methods. Nearness only. Bullet points like small, excellent tools. Mirror, don't press. Record repetition, not spectacle. If the air is louder than the instrument is wrong. At the bottom, a line that looked like policy and felt like vow. If you can't keep it with, the house keeps it without you. Redding, who wrote in block letters without shame, added a county stamp. Effective today, he said. Harbor adopts the verb with. He looked out at the water with the expression of a man who has finally found a law he doesn't have to enforce because people wanted it before he did. Mason uploaded his quieter cut and refused to thumbnail anyone's fear. Title, Why We Didn't Open the Door. Description, How to Pay in Less. He watched the counter climb like a tide that had decided to include him but not consult him. Comments leaned sparse, curious, respectful. Someone wrote, I can't tell what happened. Someone else replied, good. It happened anyway. Mason closed the laptop and left it closed, a private experiment in being done. Blue Listener widened its ellipse a polite yard and then pulled it back, as if demonstrating both possibility and restraint for the benefit of whoever might someday need both. Hunter shrank to a smudge until even Mara's labels couldn't justify their font. Razor went absent the way shame does when it can afford new clothes. Broker found work elsewhere. There's always a market for unearned urgency somewhere. Inventory, Mara said, not because she needed one, but because humans do. We keep a dog's paw on a seam, Ethan answered, a friend in a dinghy, a scientist who writes stillness into methods, a lens that learned to steady the person holding it, a county that learned a verb. And what do we leave? Coordinates, he said, weapons, pride, receipts we don't need to frame. Evening conspired with blue hour to subtract what didn't belong. The ring under the hatch dimmed to memory. The seam's smile relaxed into anonymity. Ethan placed his hand on the steel without ritual. Ghost matched him without being asked. The air tasted like a sentence finished properly, full stop, then quiet. We don't open doors, he told the wind, we keep watch. The sea signed back with the smallest wave a person can feel and not see. It rocked the skiff just enough to count as acknowledgement and moved on. That was the last line the day needed. Anyone insisting on a moral had not been listening. Port Marin woke like a ledger that had been balanced overnight. Salt rested on the planks in orderly crystals. Ropes lay in the neat chaos only working harbors can manage. News vans idled crooked along the pier, their masts extended like nervous antennae that feared the weather more than the truth. Mason stood with his back to them, eyes on the water, camera off. Ghost curled his tail around Ethan's boot and sighed like a good law. Inside the harbor office, time behaved. A wall clock that cared, charts with corners curled by honest humidity, a fan pretending slowness was a choice. Sheriff Redding folded his arms and made the room square. A port attorney tapped a pen against legal pad lines as if rhythm might coax certainty. An insurance adjuster hugged a stack of forms that could stop a door, stop a conversation, stop a life if you let them. Dr. Lila Chen laid down a single sheet of paper that weighed more than the building. Guest right protocol, nearness only, she said. She didn't raise her voice, the sentence arrived standing up. We measure with, not on, accepted metrics, pressure, slope, repeating absence, prohibited, mass transfer, intrusion, coordinates of host, violations, void access. The attorney's pen stopped tapping. The adjuster stopped hugging the doorstop. Redding's chin moved half a degree, his version of good. Mason set a laptop on the table and pressed play. The rough cut was a sermon against spectacle. No whoosh boom, no red arrows, no breathless VO. Ordinary water, a crease that formed and erased, a rope laid over the surface, and never into it. The camera wobbled once and then remembered to breathe. I trimmed the applause, Mason said, who kept the part that can be believed twice. A courier slid an envelope across the table as if it might contain a cure. The paper smelled like money and promises. Inside, NDA, a page of zeros, and a single printed sentence. We can bring order to your miracle. Ethan didn't sit up. He wrote 2 words diagonally across the NDA and pushed it back. With declined. The fan became the loudest thing in the room. The attorney looked at the words the way people look at bridges they didn't think could hold, and then realized had been carrying them for years. They went to the dock without anyone pretending this was a show. Finch idled at the corridor's lip with his palms visible. Ethan matched 0.7 and let return draw a modest crease. Chen held the air mic above the water. The attorney and adjuster squinted at reality until it relented and became clear. 15 seconds, Ethan said. Then we erase. That's the witness fee. Seconds behaved. At 15, Ethan lifted his hand. Finch inverted the enamel mug. The crease retired without sulk. The water looked proud of being ordinary. "We can codify with," the attorney said, surprised at his own gentleness. "Forbid on, protect a thing we can't own." Redding signed the bottom of Chen's page with letters that didn't apologize for their corners. "Harbor rule," he said, "effective now." Offshore, Hunter chose a heading that meant elsewhere. Razor kept its whistle private. Broker drifted like a paragraph that didn't survive edit. "Predators filed as weather," Mara said, smiling where machines usually don't. "No one sues weather." Mason hit upload. Title: Why We Didn't Open the Door. Description: How to Pay in Less. The thumbnail was a rope across water. No faces, no fear. The counter climbed the way tides climb without asking permission. At the fuel dock, they hung a small board whose wood had learned to argue with rain and wind. The letters were not fancy. The rule didn't need them to be. With, not on borrow. Carry, return paid in less. A kid in a hoodie read it out loud, then, without being told, stood still 3 seconds as if the board were listening. Ghost lifted his head, read the air, and set his chin down again. Ethan looked at the harbor and felt the kind of tired that means you've set down weight, not picked it up. Evening stretched a single blue across everything until the harbor agreed to be one thing at a time. The ribs 0.7 sank to the kind of hum that only people who have learned to want it can hear. Ghost rearranged himself into comfort with edges and rested his chin on Ethan's knee like a weight that means stay until staying is finished. A gray dinghy came to the corridor lip. No motor, no cargo, no camera. Finch lifted the enamel mug and set it right side up. Objects were allowed again. The rule chose not to use them. He touched 2 fingers to his cap. Ethan returned the smallest nod that still counted. They both looked at the water as if it had walked into the room and needed a seat. At the pier, Chen taped a second sheet beneath the rule board. Supplemental methods. Nearness-only. Bullet points like well-kept tools. Mic above water. Breath mirrored, not led. Record repetition, not spectacle. Rope over. 0 mass transfer. If you can't mirror it, decline. Sheriff Redding read it, nodded once, and didn't ask for a version with more syllables. On Mason's channel, a 30-second video appeared without a hook. Ordinary water. A crease. No crease. Caption: This is the proof. It let us film because we didn't try to own it. The comments whispered rather than talked. Respect looks like that when it forgets it's supposed to perform. A rented kayak drifted toward the Seams neighborhood. A gust tried to make a point. Ethan matched 0.7 and asked the fold to remember gently. The kayak rose an inch it could take credit for, settled outside the lane, and kept going. The paddler thought they'd found their balance. Good. Balance deserved the compliment. Out at paperwork distance, Hunter filed transit logs that made it look like it had always been a boat. Razor's whistle appeared in a graduate appendix as artifact resolved by field etiquette. Broker's inbox remained blank, which is one kind of confession. They thrive in hallways, Mara mused. We gave them streets with speed limits. They haven't learned joy there yet, but they've stopped running. Ethan inventoried the day in nouns that refused to turn into trophies. A dog's paw on steel. A friend in a dinghy. A scientist who writes stillness into methods. A lens that steadies the person holding it. A county that adopted a verb. Across his chest, the glyph wrote once 441, hold 235, and then declined to remain. The house keeps no souvenirs. That is how it stays a house. Blue hour tipped toward night. The ring under the hatch dimmed to the same brightness as memory. The seam let its smile go. A line doesn't have to perform when the sentence is finished. Ethan placed his hand on the steel. Ghost placed his paw beside it. 2 signatures without ink. "We don't open doors," he told the wind. "We keep watch." The ocean signed back with the smallest possible wave. Felt, not seen. It moved the kayaker half an inch toward home and pressed every board. In the pier, one molecule closer to one another. Enough. The story stopped needing itself, which is how you know you can set it down, and it will keep working when you're not looking. In the end, there was no treasure to open, only a house that learned our names and a sea that kept its library. We didn't win by forcing the door. We learned a smaller verb, with breath, not pressure, with lane, not path, with witness, not proof. Hunter, razor, broker, filed under weather. The county learned a verb. The camera learned a silence. The scientist wrote stillness into methods. A dog put his paw on the seam. A friend held a dinghy steady. And the ocean answered with a wave too small to see but big enough to feel. So this is the receipt we don't frame. With, not on. Borrow, carry, return, paid in less. If the 0.7 still hums in your chest, you already know the rest. We don't open doors, we keep watch. If this story kept you company, subscribe and share the rule. Start the playlist from part 1 to hear the sea learn its own sentence, or stay for the postscript, tools, methods, and how we film nearness only without breaking the water. Either way, leave fewer footprints than you arrived with, and let the surface learn you back.